statement, the psychoanalyst should be an encyclopedia of the arts, is confusing. Some think that they need to know everything so to deal with the analysis as discourse. What I'm saying here is in many books of psychoanalysis. They ask you to read many things, not only for your elaboration, but to know things of the analysis. Okay? Freud practices like that too, using knowledge or knowledge from the analytic theory, and I understand this because he was the first. Anyway, his description of what he said here about the gods can be compared to psychosis or the early stages of development, as they are called sometimes by some psychoanalysts. But this being in connection with the word, but also this way of everything is confused, everything is one, this connection of the word, it's also characteristic not of psychosis, but of the person who is awakened, the person who is meditating, the person who has access to their own desire, who can go beyond their body. So the same characteristics that he considered immature and the first stage of the evolution actually is the opposite, is where the analysis should go, in my opinion. If we want to be awake. Awake came from what? From the hypnotism of the other's discourse, where we are objects. And it is a topological function that I believe Lacan will appreciate. When Lacan made I think it was the Moebius strip, yeah, the Moebius strip, there he said something without saying it. He didn't say only the woman does not exist, but the unconscious does not exist. But in what way? The unconscious doesn't exist as something that is behind. The unconscious doesn't exist as something that is behind the discourse or the opposite of something else. It's just there, operating constantly. If you follow the sides of the Moebius strip, what is on the bottom, it's in the up. It's constantly changing, shifting. Okay, so what has been removed from there is that line separating and making a lot of psychoanalysts thinking in terms of below, depth, and surface. And they explain psychoanalysis like that. Oh, CBT is for the surface and psychoanalysis is for the depth. That's a very stupid explanation. Page 35. After comparing Jewish religion and Egyptian and showing the opposition between them, Freud, blah, 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 blah. Now I will show a comparison with the expectation to show their original identity. Okay? Pay attention to the steps. First, oppositions, then similarities. It's like an essay in the university. He suggests something like this in page 22 as well. He speaks about examining both the negative and the positive. The interesting fact here is the separation, the separating line between same and opposite. Okay? It's very interesting to see that he has a line that he's separating the opposite and the same. Let's go to page 25. He mentions some things that I really appreciate. He mentions a phoneme that Lacan, some Lacanians, they consider it as another object, a phoneme. The name, he says, the name Atem, which is an Egyptian name of a king, he says, yeah, this sounds like Adonai, Atem Adonai. I don't know the exact pronunciation, but there is something there. So Freud here hears the signifier. He has access to the signifier. And of course, you can see that in a lot of his cases. He's using language as well in what I said. Whilst earlier he was working with the healthy ego style, with this opposite and the same. These are practices of the ego psychology. But now he's using the signifier. Page 27. At the end, and then at the beginning of the page 28. If Moses gave the Jews not only a new religion, but also the commandment for circumcision, he was not a Jew, but an Egyptian. And in that case, the Mosaic religion was probably an Egyptian one. And in view of its contrast to the popular religion, the religion of the Aten, with which the later Jewish religion agrees in some remarkable respects. Okay, what's important here? The way, if you read these pages, I'm not going to read more, but it's very similar to the way Aristotle was analyzing. Aristotle's way of analyzing was called the organon. Okay, it's a very special way of philosophizing. Read it, it's very important. If you want to produce a space, that's my response to it, this sort of analysis, okay? If you want to produce a space for the act of the analysis, you don't practice like this. This is a direction to cure with knowledge, not even with the truth, because by using this Aristotelian organon and the way Freud is mentioned here, you just create absolute meanings. And the absolute meaning, it has an impact on the analysis. And the only opportunity they have is to identify with the analyst discourse interpretation. Finding the opposites. Another technique that Freud uses in dream analysis as well is replacing with the opposite, as in page 28. Moses was not just an Egyptian, but of a great family. Okay, this is what he says there basically. Then he starts analyzing evidence based on that assumption. He makes the assumption because of whatever other evidence he chooses. He even uses historian. And then, but that's a text, that's understandable. But basically, I want you to see here that he creates assumptions, even with his cases, and then he takes the assumption as a truth. Okay? And then he starts analyzing the evidence from the analyzer, in this case from history, based on that assumption. This is completely a position of operating from knowledge with knowledge. Indeed, you can learn a great deal for yourself, but nothing about your desire with this. Absolutely nothing. Page 39. Another encounter with the signifier and its phonetic marking. A nice example here in page 39 that Freud mentioned is a Habiru warriors and Hebrews, Habiru Hebrews. Again, he hears the signifier, he hears something of the letter here. Okay? This is closer to the letter than to the signifier. The connection with the signifier then leads to a historical construction. He follows language here. That's very nice. Then, when there are signifiers, but I want to explain something further here that happens in many practices, practicing analysis. Where are we? Okay. When there are signifiers and they become a point of identification, like you take from the signifiers, you create the truth in the sessions, you create an assumptions because of the signifiers, then immediately you create the master. You are the master. Because even though your assumption is based on signifier, it's an assumption of knowledge. Okay? So, then there is a master, like Moses described in the text. Can we read these pages here? 39 pages, 39 and 14. Like Moses is described in the text, or Freud himself, I would say, then desire is lost, and thus the master signifier does not stay on the symbolic dimension, but pushes the subject to imaginary identifications. So here, because of that, if you have a master operating, even if they're using the signifiers to create assumptions, okay, what you've got there, people, the students of Freud later, they took these signifiers and they created the imaginary dimension of that signifier because they took them out of context and they created the formula. And then what you've got there is the transmission of the psychoanalysis through imaginary identifications. And here we've got Freudianism versus psychoanalysis, or even Lacanianism versus psychoanalysis. And I provoke you to go to many psychoanalytic schools, including Lacanian, and I will give you now some key phrases to listen. Of course, you've got, probably you know from the American movies, this Jesus says, how will Jesus react here? Okay. So you will hear phrases like, but Freud said that, but Lacan said that, but Miller said that. And when these phrases are used, they are not anymore references to elaborate desire, but phrases to silence the subject and shape them according to an idea of what a psychoanalyst should be. Just go to seminars of different schools and pay attention to what I'm telling you. When something is said not in reference with the lines of the school, somebody will jump and say, I mean, I know that many times it's happening. Oh, Miller said that. Oh, Freud said that, or whatever. John said that. And the sad thing is that many people, they just remain quiet, as if they encounter something from the word of God. Of course, it happens with many psychotherapeutic schools. It happens in the schools of psychology and psychiatry. You cannot even think further. I know psychiatrists that they speak about Freud, and the other psychiatrists accuse them that they are not scientific. Okay. Read page 30, where Freud speaks about circumcision. Once you embody an imaginary identification, that's the other stage. You've got the symbolic, the signifiers, then they are taken, they become an assumption, they become steady, and then they create imaginary identifications. People identify with it. And this is the third paradigm, the third stage. Once you embody an imaginary identification, then you've got paranoia there. When you've got paranoia, you've got the school of psychoanalysis operating on these identifications. And the need, of course, you've got paranoia there, and the need to fuse and double, to forge and double with the other side of the binary. For example, Freud here speaks of the Turks referring to Christians as unclean dogs with reference to circumcision. The master signifier here supporting the narcissist, offering stability for the specular image, is the signifier clean. So you are there clean. Clean person, clean human. The unclean is related to the animal, unclean dog. And of course, we've got the binary. These sort of binaries are very characteristic of paranoia. Okay, and read this page. I will stop here for today. Read page 30, what he speaks about how Moses became the leader of the Jews and how then these signifiers he brought, they marked their body with circumcision. They had to be like him, equal to him, not only spiritually, but their bodies as well. I'm not saying this is the truth, but okay. Freud here is speaking about imaginary identifications. If you want me to add something about circumcision further, this is a position that Saint Paul, Apostle Paul, was holding in, I think it was a 63 AD after Jesus, and they were holding the first council of the apostles, the first ecumenical meeting of the church, and they were dealing there with a lot of the Gentiles. They called them Gentiles, the Phrygi in ancient Greek. That a lot of them, they wanted to come and become psychoanalysts, Christians back then. And of course, St. Paul says, okay, we have to do whatever we do, they have to be circumcised. And St. Paul, who was also educated, besides the Temple of Solomon, he was educated in Greece, in Asia Minor. So he knew that the Greeks and the Romans and whatever the ancient world, they wouldn't accept that because they were making fun of that practice. So instead of having this literal marking of the body, it's important what I'm telling you, that Freud mentions here. Okay, he's our great man, he became the idol, so we want to identify with him, to be as great as him, so we circumcised. He spoke about to circumcise the sin from our heart. He gave a metaphor there. Okay, he moved it from paranoia and he created something symbolic. And it's the same person who spoke about the body of the resurrection, which I mentioned many times, the pneumatikon soma, which is, I equal it with the non-body and the feminine jouissance, which is a jouissance beyond the signifier. Okay, so there is something here operating in psychoanalytic schools that the body of the psychoanalyst has to be Freudian as well. How is a Freudian body? Well, I will add another question before I finish it here. I want you to think, how is the Freudian body? But how is the psychoanalyst body? How is it the body? If you are not Freudian, I'm referring to this literal marking of the body to become a Hebrew, to become a psychoanalyst, the metaphorical one. Okay, let's pause here. I've got so many notes, but it's an hour plus I'm talking, so I can take some questions if you want. Yes. Nadia, questions?
I wanted to ask something. You said about Freud is trying to fill the gap in the other all the time.
Yes.
That gap is the gap where the desire resides, where it could, like, could you elaborate this a little bit?
Yes. With the way he's approaching the text, and many parts of his cases is by feeling he's not allowing any dispute. He's giving absolute interpretations, and he's filling that gap. So he's not allowing for a unique solution. Let's use that. He's not allowing for a unique formation of the real. And why is it formation? To form your own real, to form your own solution. It is the same way that each psychoanalyst, this is what we did in our school, by the way, we allow them to have their own access to the real. So by filling this gap, you are producing this absolute knowledge, and then the person, the subject, the only thing they have to do is, because there is no desire, desire is lost there. The only thing they can do is to identify with the psychoanalyst, or to identify with the analyst's desire. And what desire is here? The analyst's wish, not desire, because it's not desire proper here. It's a wish for cure here, for what I say to be true. Yes, it relates to desire.
Could the reverse happen, where an analysand tries to fill in all the gaps?
Of course.
The session?
Yes. We had that with obsessive analysants, and or not only obsessive, I wouldn't speak in terms of distraction, but with people that when they don't give in to their free association, they're kind of analyzing before they tell you, they're trying to fill the gap in the presence of the other. It's the free association is quite difficult to occur. It's very difficult. And actually, in many of my seminars, I say that sometimes it's the end of the analysis. If you are able to speak freely for what you want, that's free association for me. But to achieve free association, like actually to speak so freely, okay, it's a really big progress in analysis. A lot of people, they analyze in themselves before they speak. But it's not the same. The articulation of the voice is not the same, because when you start speaking, you are losing it. You don't have control.
Thank you, Petro. I think Penny raised her hand.
Where is the hand? Where's Penny?
That's okay. I'm here. Actually, Nadia's indication is kind of in the zone that I mean. Thank you for your presentation. Many valuable valuable points. My question relates to the transformation, let's say, of the experience of the subject into desire that is their own. And on the question of the gap and Freud filling it, the push or the disposition to fill the gap, my intuition is that this is an anticipation that something traumatic may come. So it's not really a defense against desire, but a defense against jouissance. And the unknown becomes problematic when what we anticipate is an unwanted object. There's also the dimension of the, traumatic nature of the voice, both of one's own and of the other. And in terms, maybe you can do it today, or maybe you can, you'll bring it into other seminars. What would an analytic operation, sense an analytic act, look like that responds to the discourse of the analysand in such a way as to, let's say, shake the inertia? But we have to proceed with care, because it's not just that, but what is the way to approach that? The other thing I want to say about the gap is valuable, but actually the silence of the analyst that leaves the analysand to speak can also result in very long analyses, because the analysand is going to be self-censoring and speaking within the limits that they suppose to the analyst. And I remember this relates to something else that you said. I can't remember precisely what point, but I think it was, oh yes, it was when Freud was talking about, you were commenting on Freud talking about the organism. And it occurred to me this week, the best way I can describe it is kind of little joke that Eric Laurent made once about somebody who lost their wallet in the bushes, but they were looking under the lamppost for it. And when they were asked why, they said, well, because there's light here. And the thing is, there's the fundamental enigma of the status of the living being. And I like that, the direction that you're taking, a sustained direction for a depathologization of the phenomena of life from a human within the human experience. Once we begin to put people in clinical structures, we're pathologizing and framing it within a certain quite limited perspective, and it limits our resources and our possibilities for access to desire, which is, desire is outside all of these. Original desire is synchronic, it's in the moment. outside of all signification. The thing is, how do we facilitate the tracheotomy that allows the subject to be able to breathe their desire?
That was a comment, right? It wasn't a question.
Well, my question is that, in other words, what is, because you've described many ways in which it's not an analytical operation. Yes. To do this or to do this or to do this. So what does an analytic operation look like?
Okay.
Well, that gives afterwards that there is an expansion of the flow of life, desire, whatever that is, constant with subjects want to be. Yeah.
Well, there are many things I can say, but I will say just a few now. The first thing is for the analyst to have desire, to have access to their own desire, not to what they consider as desire, but is useless, to have access to their own desire. And if you have access to your own desire, you are shining. Henry Kissinger spoke, and it's very funny that I will mention Henry Kissinger in a psychoanalytic seminar. He spoke about Mao Zedong. He says that when it was one of those people that when they entered the room, he just filled the room, and you felt something on your body. It was very important what he said. So I cannot, if the only thing we can transmit is desire, then we transmit desire with our presence, with our being. Okay, so that's the first operation, to have access to this sort of desire which is connected with the act. Not to think of desire or the psychoanalyst neither as an identity, but neither as a position. It's a movement. What is desire? What do you discover in psychoanalysis? Access to your desire, but desire, what is it? It's a way to approach life. If you don't do it through the metaphor of the fantasy, it's a way to approach life. So that's the first thing. And by doing so, in analysis program stages, when somebody comes there, you are still operating from that desire and you can transmit it. How do you transmit it? You challenge in the preliminary sessions. You don't want to see the clinical structure. You don't protect the ego, but you mark the discourse so to see if there is desire. This is what Lacan called the aggressivity. You want to see that desire, and how do you see it? If after a few sessions, what I call my preliminary sessions, they don't get the signifier, for good or for bad, maybe they're not ready at that moment, whatever, maybe they need something else, and they still insist on the symptom without giving you different signifiers, then this is not the time for them to analysis. You will have to use your body in analysis. You have to get away from your desire and put your body there. That's why a lot of psychotherapists, they say you need to have a strong bone to practice psychotherapy, because they practice with their body. So I have a lot of steps to tell, but my response is this to you. How is a proper operation when the psychoanalyst does not practice with their body? In one sentence. I gave a few examples, I can give more, but in one line, this is it. I can do another seminar later because I like your question, by the way. I really like it. But it's based on that, to practice and to live, to be able to live without your body. But what I mean by that, I spoke about the feminine resistance. When you have access to that sort of desire, okay, then you've got access to what Lacan mentioned, the Freudian asceticism of language. It's very important that he used the word asceticism there, Freudian asceticism. It was in the Ethics of Psychoanalysis, in the first 30 pages probably. And nobody pay attention to that. It's so powerful statement. They are Freudian asceticism of language. When you have access to that, it's you don't receive a body because of the fantasy of their work, but you provide the body to your desire. It's a different. You provide your body to your desire. It's not a vehicle to carry your fantasy, but it's a vehicle of your desire.
Hearing you, I think you've already illustrated it in the Kissinger comment of Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
The thing is, and in a sense, precisely what the subject is censoring themselves is to not fill the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so this is what has to be somehow transformed. Is the idea that the subject has to, in order to be, acceptable to the other, one has to not fill the room. And the gap is to allow the subject to, or not even to allow, it's to enable the subject to change their mode of operation, because it's the subject that has to shift how they function with their thought, what they give consent to, when they hold back, when they, allow and such. So that it's really that which has to transform so that the subject directs their own life in all its dimension in a creative ways, and to allow presence, which is not the same as dominating, but it is about presence. And I think you.
I was speaking. I was speaking with a few psychologists and psychotherapists in the UK. This is a problem in the UK also. They told me, these are training analysts, and they told me that people, they become psychoanalysts and they register by having only 2 cases. And the most important part of their training, it's not just to get knowledge or go through 4 years or 5 years or 10 years of psychoanalysis, but and this is where I consider the pass. This is the real pass, and this is the pass of our school, by the way. To become analyst of the school, you have to achieve that. How do you establish yourself? Not as Mao Zedong. I wouldn't like him to be my analyst. But how do you establish yourself in the social bond beyond you, without using discourses that are related to, oh, I will cure you from depression. Yes, depression is CBT, but with psychoanalysis, you go to the root of it, without using that. Basically, how do you establish yourself as a magician, as a shaman? Why people should come to you without giving promises? So that's the actual path. That's why I ask most psychoanalysts I know in England, in the UK, they are, when they hear the number of cases that we have here, the analysts in Cyprus, they are amazed. But it's not because here actually it's more difficult for people to come to analysis. They are less open-minded than in the UK. But the failure of the psychoanalysts to establish themselves as a point of reference, it relates to their own desire or to the way they were analyzed with an analyst that didn't have access to his own desire.
Yeah, I think, again, what you're saying makes me think that for the analysand has to come to be able to cope with living their own presence and not be intimidated by or distracted by their reaction to the other. That's the work.
It's work, and it leads to not to cure, not to a discovery of the truth.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with.
Yeah. It's closer to the act, what you said, the truth and the act being one, to have this literal meaning, but outside of the fantasy, because when they are inside the fantasy, any sort of truth is there leads to an acting out. Because some writers, they said that, oh, when you have access to desire, be careful because you might act it out. You cannot act out your desire. You are the desire.
Through the frame of the other, one's own presence is unbearable to oneself.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Anybody else? Nadia, ask people. Your English are better.
If anyone has any further questions, please go ahead.
Hi. I'd like to ask a question. I was reading the other day a text on repression, and it actually made me think to ask this question. Is the object breath repressed? Because it kind of made me think of the way the breath is operating. It is operating in its own accord, like the drives, for example.
The object A cannot be repressed. It is created because it is outside of the Borromean knot. Okay, it's an object of desire. The object breath is not an object of the drive. It cannot be. Okay. And is not marked by a signifier. If you cross the fantasy, but there are many ways to cross the fantasy. There's a Tom, whatever, all this stuff we said different times. But if you are going to operate on the mystical feminine jouissance, it means that you go beyond the body. If you go beyond the body, you go beyond the Borromean knot. This is where the breath is. Okay, so it cannot be repressed. It is created in the same way. The analysis is created in the same way that desire is created, because desire proper, it cannot be separated from its act. There is something pushing you to analysis, but it becomes actual desire when it is connected with this act. Anything else, Marino?
No, thank you.
Any further questions? Raise your hand. Unmute your microphone.
Where's my wife? You have a question? You can ask me how many whiskeys I had.
I will keep that when you come home.
5.
Petro,
I hope you will be able to drive.
There is a lockdown and I'm drunk, so it's a big fine if they get me. Yeah, doesn't matter.
I don't have a question. I just want to say that we will have to read again the book. I mean, thank you very much. This is really food for thought, but I have to read the book again. I cannot just, you know.
I'm sure you will read it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I already have it in my handbag, but I was too lazy to start reading it. So.
Yeah. This is part of it. I will continue with, probably we'll have a couple of seminars, because there is a lot of material. These books were not given the proper attention, because they should be given the proper attention, not only as sociological approaches from psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic approaches to sociology, but people forget that Freud's own heart was to the classics. His offices were full of statues and books about the classics. Yeah. So there is something there to learn about.
And archaeology as well.
Yes. So there is something there.
But also these books, I believe every time you read them, you find something new.
Of course.
So you have to read them again and again and again.
Yes, yes. I read them again and again and again, and then I got bored and I started reading other stuff.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I mean...
yeah. I understand
for the purpose of these seminars, we will have to read them again.
Yes, if I'm sure you will read it, but I just gave a few notes. I will give a lot of other stuff, so people can approach the text differently. Mm-hmm. Not only to read Freud as an analyst, as Lacan did, but to be able to see what was transmitted from Freud to Lacan, but also to the analysts, because anything that you see in psychoanalytic schools, everybody's claiming that it's a child of Freud. It's all there. Somebody took something from Freud. Okay, I took the breath, the object breath, from Freud. I saw it there, but he didn't have the conception. There are a couple of cases that he mentions the breath. One is in Moses, by the way. I will, in one of the few seminars, I will tell you. But according to Richard Klein, because years ago when I mentioned about the object breath, he really liked it, and he gave me the reference, some of which I had, and he told me his own interpretation of that Freud could not. He was speaking about the breath, but he couldn't touch it in the way you do because he didn't have the conception of the object A that was given by Lacan. So we're lucky because we've got both Freud and Lacan's contributions, and we can create our own voices as a school, or not.
I have apologies. Yes.
No.
So while I was writing, I started thinking about breath, the object of the respiratory drive, that title. Since we said that it's beyond the Borromean knot and it has to be created, you mentioned in...
Marinos, by the way, it's the editor of my latest book, The Breath, the Object of the Respiratory Drive. Yes. So
you mentioned that it has to be created and it's beyond the Borromean knot. You mentioned in a meeting we had with some other people that the drive operates in an elliptical type of movement.
Yes.
Whereas when we go beyond the Borromean knot, we are talking about straight lines. So we go beyond identifications. How can we talk about the object of the respiratory drive then?
You just spoke about it. In what way?
But we're not talking about drives.
I said that the object of the respiratory, well, there is a different operation of the drive. If you've got the drives operating in the different sorts of jouissances, and then Lacan gives us this jouissance that is beyond the body. If it is beyond the body, it is beyond the signifier. This is very important. If it is beyond the body, this jouissance that is beyond the body, it means that it's beyond the signifier. So I'll give you a question, because I know the answers to this. How does the drive operate in the feminine jouissance? Let's make it simple. Okay. No, that's it. Yes, but that's infinite. But in the drive, let's think of the infinite, and then you've got one point of reference in the infinite, which is the object A, and then everywhere you go, you have to go and pass from that object around it. Okay. So whatever you create a knot there.
Yes.
When the drive related to the object of desire, which is a breath, is the object of desire. The das Ding is a breath. It is not the knot that is created passing from the same point, but the point itself is created. Okay. So very simply, this is how the drive operates. We can speak in another seminar about the Freudian part of the drive operating that when you identify with the act, the source, the pressure, the aim, and the object. Let's keep it for another seminar.